The girl fell face first into the snow and no one moved. Not the men leaning against the false-fronted buildings. Not the women peering through frost-bitten windows. Not the barkeep, who had just set a glass down and watched it slosh as her knees gave way. The snow swallowed the sound of her fall the way it swallowed everything in that town, soft and quiet and merciless. And for a long moment the only motion was the steam rising from her mouth as she tried to draw breath that would not come right. She was thin enough that the wind could push her, sick enough that the cold had already taken too much. And when she tried to lift herself, her arms shook and folded under her like rotten fence posts. She wore no coat, only a shawl that had been mended so many times it no longer knew its original shape. And the blood at the corner of her mouth froze dark, almost as soon as it touched the white. A few feet away, her medicine bottle lay cracked, its contents bleeding into the snow like a stain no one wanted to name. The town looked at her and looked away, because everyone knew her name, and everyone knew what sickness did to families, and everyone knew how quickly help became obligation. Somewhere a door shut. Somewhere a laugh died early. Somewhere a horse stamped and blew, and that was all. She tried to call out, but it came as a cough that tore at her chest and left her gasping. The cold had a way of reaching inside and scraping you hollow, and she felt it now, sharp as wire, curling around her ribs. Her eyes searched the street, not for kindness, because she had learned better, but for the shape of her house, for the narrow path she had walked since she was a child. It was too far. Every step had cost her something she did not have anymore. She pressed her cheek into the snow, and it burned, then numbed, then burned again. She thought of her mother's hands when they had been strong, and the way they had shaken at the end. She thought of the doctor who had stopped coming. She thought of the way people crossed the street when they saw her coming. Her breath rattled, a sound too big for her body, and her vision blurred at the edges. Someone's boots passed close enough that she could smell leather and manure, and they did not stop. Across the street, down by the livery, a man swung into the saddle with a grunt that came from old pain. He had been tightening a cinch with fingers stiff from cold and age, cursing under his breath at a strap that would not sit right. When he saw her go down, he saw the way she fell, not like a drunk or a clumsy child, but like something cut loose. He saw the town's shoulders turn, saw the way eyes slid away, as if looking too long might draw the sickness toward them. He had been in towns like this his whole life, had been this town once or twice himself, and the sight struck him harder than the wind. He did not think. He did not weigh what it might cost. He swung down again, let the reins fall, and started running. Snow grabbed at his boots, heavy and deep, and the cold knifed into his lungs as he took the street at a dead run. He was no young hero, no clean-handed savior. He was built from years of bad miles and worse choices, and his knees complained with every step. But he ran like a man chased, like a man who knew that stopping was the same as letting something die. Someone shouted his name, or maybe shouted at him to mind his own, and he did not hear which. The wind flattened his hat against his head and tore tears from his eyes. And still he ran. He saw her clearly now, saw the way her body trembled, saw the blood on the snow, and something in him broke open when he dropped to his knees. Beside her, the cold soaked through his trousers in an instant. He set a hand on her shoulder and felt how light she was, how wrong. She flinched at the touch, eyes opening wide and unfocused, and for a heartbeat he feared he had scared what little life she had left right out of her. He leaned close so she could see his face, lined and burned and real, and he spoke her name because he knew it, because it mattered. Her lips moved, but no sound came. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her, ignoring the way the wind cut straight through his shirt now. He scooped her up, surprised again by her lack of weight, and she moaned, a thin animal sound that went straight through him. The town watched then because motion demanded it, because a man running with a dying girl in his arms was harder to ignore than a girl in the snow. Faces appeared in doorways, eyes narrowed, mouths tightened. Someone said it was foolish. Someone said she was already gone. Someone said he'd catch it too. He did not slow. He took the street at an angle, toward the doctor's office that had been closed too long, toward any place with a fire. Her head lolled against his chest, and he adjusted his grip, murmuring to her, telling her to stay, to listen, to breathe. Each step was a small battle, his boots slipping, his breath tearing, his arms burning. The wind rose and filled his ears with a sound like a warning. Halfway there she stiffened and then sagged, and he stumbled, nearly went down with her. Panic flared hot and sudden. He stopped, bent over her, pressed his ear to her chest, felt for breath with fingers gone numb. There was still a flutter there, weak but stubborn. He swore, loud and raw, and lifted her again. He could feel eyes on his back like weight. He could feel the town closing ranks behind him, already telling itself that this was not their fault. The doctor's door was locked, as he had known it would be. He kicked it once, twice, the sound sharp in the cold, and then he turned and ran again, toward the boarding house where a stove still burned, toward the only woman in town who had not yet learned to look away. His legs were shaking now, his breath coming in ragged pulls. The girl's head fell back and her mouth opened, a terrible sound tearing out of her, and he felt the clock in his bones start to run out. He ran faster, pain be damned, and somewhere behind him the snow closed in on his footprints, neat and silent as if nothing had happened at all. He burst through the boarding house door, with a shoulder and a curse, sending a blast of snow and cold across the worn floorboards. And for a split second the room froze in shock, every face turned toward him, and the girl limp in his arms. The heat hit him like a wall, and the sudden change made his head spin, but he staggered forward anyway, calling for help with a voice that scraped his throat raw. Chairs scraped back, a woman cried out, and then hands were on him, guiding him, clearing a table, pushing aside dishes and cards and whatever else life had been laid out, there before it was interrupted. He laid the girl down and knelt beside her, his coat still wrapped tight around her thin shoulders, his hands shaking now that the running had stopped. Someone fetched water. Someone else ran for blankets. The woman who owned the place, grey-haired and sharp-eyed, pushed her way through and took charge with the authority of someone who had seen too much to hesitate. She pressed a hand to the girl's forehead and swore softly, then looked up at the man and asked him where the medicine was. He held up the broken bottle, its contents gone, and the woman's mouth tightened. She told him to get more, told him where, told him to run, and when he hesitated, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength and told him that standing there would not keep the girl breathing. He nodded once and turned, already moving, already feeling the cold, waiting to take another piece of him. Outside, the wind had risen, driving the snow sideways now, erasing the street. The light was going fast, the sky sinking into that flat gray that meant more storm. He ran again, legs screaming, lungs burning, toward the far end of town where the supply store kept what the doctor no longer bothered to stock. He knew the owner would not want to sell, and knew the arguments that would come, and he did not slow. His mind kept returning to the feel of the girl's breath, the way it had fluttered like it was afraid to stay. He ran past the places where people had watched and done nothing, past faces that turned away again now that the hard part had been taken out of their hands. The store was open, light spilling out onto the snow, and he did not bother with the door, just shouldered his way in and slammed it shut behind him. The man behind the counter started to protest, then saw his face and stopped. Words were exchanged, sharp and fast, money thrown down, and the medicine shoved across the counter like a secret. The storekeeper warned him about the sickness, about contagion, about blame, and the cowboy did not answer. He was already turning, already back into the storm, the bottle clutched in his numb hand like a promise. By the time he reached the boarding house again, his vision was narrowing, the world tunneling down to the door and the light beyond it. He fell against it, caught himself, and staggered inside. The heat made him sway, but hands were there again, pulling him through, taking the bottle, uncorking it with teeth because fingers were too slow. The woman poured a careful measure and tipped it between the girl's lips, rubbing her throat, coaxing her to swallow. They waited. The room held its breath. Somewhere a clock ticked too loud. The girl coughed, a wet tearing sound, and everyone flinched. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and she gasped, dragging air in like it hurt. The woman swore again, this time with something like relief, and kept working, talking to her in a low, steady voice. The man sank back against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor, his strength gone all at once. His hands were white and cracked, his clothes soaked and steaming. He stared at the girl as if afraid to look away now, afraid that if he did, she would slip back into the cold. Minutes stretched. The medicine did its slow work. Color crept back into the girl's face in small, uncertain patches. Her breathing steadied just a little. The woman nodded once, sharp, and said she would live through the night if nothing else went wrong. The words hit him harder than the run had, and he bowed his head, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been knotted tight for years. Outside, the storm howled, and the town settled back into itself, already rewriting what had happened, already deciding what it would and would not remember. Inside, by the fire, a girl slept under borrowed blankets, and a man with snow in his hair and blood on his cuffs watched her breathe, and knew that whatever came next, he had not looked away.